On the night of the 2016 election, Americans were going through a vast array of emotions and experiences. Director Rob W. King had a one-of-a-kind experience, because while part of the country was going through disbelief at the largest political upset since Truman beat Dewey, King was on his way to meet Nicolas Cage to talk about his new film, The Humanity Bureau.
Well, how it started is we first, because this always happens with these sorts of films and people are investing money in them, they wanted a star. And it was suggested maybe we try to get Nick to play the bad guy in the film because that would be a shorter time period for him. And so we sent the script to his team, and his manager got back to us and said, Nick likes the script, but he would rather play the lead character. But unfortunately, he's on a film that starts shooting in a few weeks. So we were like, oh, dang. And we sort of moved on, and we were trying to think of who else to approach. And we approached a few other people, and then we got a phone call from Nick's manager again saying the film he was on just literally went down the night before they were supposed to start shooting. So he's available, and he'd love to possibly be involved. So that started negotiations in terms of the money, and it was agreed that I would fly down to Vegas and meet with them, talk about the character and the script and so on and so forth. But then that became delayed for a number of reasons beyond my control, quite far into the process. And so ultimately, it just turned out that the day that I flew down to Vegas was the day of the presidential election. And when I changed planes in Seattle, Hillary Clinton was ahead. And by the time I got out of the Vegas airport, it was all over and Trump had won. Well, see, I got there that night. We didn't meet until the next day at lunch. And the strange thing is, so I was booked into a hotel that was, in the vicinity of a restaurant that Nick had chosen, which was not in central Vegas. And of course, the hotel was a casino. And so, I checked in and I thought, I'm just going to wander around the casino. So I sat at a blackjack table. It was full, and the dealer was redealing and reshuffling the decks. And so I just said, what's everyone think of the election results? And nobody at the table knew what they were. And I said, well, Donald Trump won. Everybody was like, what? And there were people saying, geez, I should have voted. But mostly they were concerned about the next, round of cards, right? Then the next day I met with Nick for lunch, and within the city itself, there didn't seem to be any alarm. But when I met with Nick, it was like the first thing, as soon as we sat down, he was like, holy shit, can you believe it? He was just in shock, right? But I think, rather than sort of get caught up in all that, we just found a way to ignore it and yet simultaneously talk about our fears by talking about the movie and about some of the themes in the script, which kind of reflected, a world in which, well, we both agreed anyhow, somebody like Trump might help accelerate that kind of a world. Well, the thing was, okay, so the script never had that in there, right? And then suddenly I was in Vegas and Mr. Trump was president, and I was sitting there talking to Nick Cage, which was one of the most surreal nights of my life, really. And we were talking about this world that might be created by somebody like Trump, and right there and then I said, maybe we should go for some of it. And he was like, yeah, that would be cool, right? So I went back and I said to the producers, I think, could we do some Trump stuff, like just a poster on a wall and whatnot. I mean, there's, I don't know, maybe 2 references to Trump in the whole film, but the one distributor, the international distributor, really liked the idea. He pushed us to do a little more. I guess, for me, the disappointing thing was we were literally shooting that movie while Trump was waiting to be inaugurated, and I felt like we were going to come out of the blocks making this statement, which I thought would be sort of cool, right? But the film's release got delayed quite a while, 8 or 9 months or something. And so when it came out, I noticed that one reviewer sort of said, I'm getting tired of this kind of anti-Trump stuff, because it had already shown up in several other films. But I would say literally we were Like we were living the thing while we were making it. Like, had that film come out in January or something, which would have been too soon post-production wise, but say February, it might have, I don't know. I just wished it had, but it didn't. So, but it's a big part of the story, climate change. And it had always been in the script that there was, this walled city, right? We built this sort of opening text that goes onto the film after the fact to say, I think more cities were walled in, but that was always in the script. But I just found it interesting, like, highly fascinating that it had been a campaign promise of Mr. Trump's to put this wall across this border. And I thought, well, down the road, there might come a day where cities just start walling themselves off again like they did in medieval times, So all of it just had this eerie connection to the bigger political climate that was going on. It all made it seem more urgent to me to make it. And we just talked a lot about the character and about our thoughts, my thoughts about it, and a lot about how I was going to pull this off. Like, he was curious, he knew on a film that small, there would be a lot of challenges, and that basically I'd have to have my shit together. And I assured him that that's the sort of director that I was, and we got along very well. And by the end of that meal, he said, "Hey, let's do this thing." So away we went. Well, first of all, I just go back a bit. When I was in high school, I just was convinced I wanted to be a writer of some kind. And there was a lot of classes I didn't really like to be in. And I had this English teacher who said, well, instead of writing an essay about the glass menagerie, the football team just got a video camera. Why don't you, make a film of the play with your buddies? That turned into a very kind of pivotal experience. I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't, blah, blah, blah. And anyhow, I made this little film, and I was very proud of myself. And I never thought that anyone could actually, where I came from, have a career doing that. And ultimately, I just pursued writing. And I tripped across an old friend from high school who had started this video production company, and they were looking for somebody to write everything and anything, which, ranged from really low-end commercials to corporate videos and stuff. So I started doing that, and I became really fascinated in how things got made. Sat in the editing room a lot, got inspired to write a short film, which ultimately I managed to get produced, and it did pretty well critically in various festivals and stuff. And that just, from there I went on to music videos for a while and worked my way into a feature, and the rest is history. I had some time on my hands, and I decided I was going to do this epic 4-day motorcycle ride. I don't know, I traveled probably like 2,500 miles or whatever. And the last day home was about 8 hours in the rain, and I got to Toronto. And when you get to the edge of a city like Toronto, it takes you another hour to get to where you live. And I landed at home about 11 p.m. and stripped off all my rain gear and poured myself a scotch and looked at my emails. And there was one from my old buddy who was a producer, Kevin DeWalt. And he said, I've got this project. It's going ahead. We need a director. I've enclosed the script. I'm wondering if you could give it a read and let me know in the next 24 hours. And I realized that email had come much earlier that day, and I thought to myself, okay, I'm going to get up early in the morning and read this. So I was just sitting there sipping my scotch, and of course I couldn't help myself, so I clicked on the PDF, and I read the first page, and then the next thing I knew it was like 1:30 in the morning, and I had read the whole script, and I just sent him an email and said, I'm in.
The Humanity Bureau is an agency that determines whether or not a person is contributing to an apocalyptic America. If they don't contribute, they are sent to New Eden, a government-sponsored utopia. Cage plays Noah, a rogue bureau agent who discovers that New Eden is actually a government-sponsored death camp and sets out to save a family from certain death.
The writer, Dave Schultz, the thing that he most wanted expressed somehow in the film was that the future, we're leaving this uncertain and possibly horrible future to our children. So he was really interested in that, the outcome of the character played by Jacob Davies sort of surviving, but being on his own. And for me, I kind of got attached to the idea of this man who was in search of this child that he had that he didn't know. and this great sense of nostalgia that this character had for when life was simpler and better. And so that kind of resonated with Nick. So we talked about that. We talked about how outgoing or not the character was going to be. I thought he would be more of an internal sort of a character as opposed to being like big, like some of the other characters or many other characters Nick has played, big personalities. So those are the kinds of things we talked about in terms of the character. He brought a lot of it on his own, which I subsequently discovered as we were shooting. We got a chance to talk about some ideas he had come up with just for his own motivation that weren't in the script, that really showed how much thought he put into it. There was one day where I can't remember what the scene was going to be between him and Sarah Lind, but I was thinking about it and wondering, how he was going to approach this. I had gone to his trailer and I was asking him about it, and he got this funny expression on his face, like, I don't know, if a friend asked you if you could lend him a couple grand, that sort of, I don't know, slightly subtle pained look. But then he said, you know what? Okay, I'll tell you what I'm thinking, which is part of my process, right? But it was like, it's one of my secrets and I don't usually tell people. That's sort of the idea I got. So I was very flattered that eventually this came out. We talked about it and he said that dress that she's wearing, because the backstory was he had this child with a woman, and then he discovers this other woman is raising the child and using her name, but it's not the person with whom he bore this child, right? So there's some dark secret behind all that. But he said that dress she's wearing, I know that dress because the woman that I loved once wore that dress. So she's even wearing her own dress, right? So, I mean, that was never part of the script or anything. It was a kind of fascinating way into how he was processing his characters reacting to this imposter, which he's starting to have feelings for in a way, right? Well, in Vegas, he and I had talked about, like, he likes to channel other actors who are no longer with us at times. And he had asked me, okay, in terms of this character, who's somebody that I was thinking of. And I said, well, Steve McQueen, he liked that idea. I think he really ran with it. It's just sort of an interesting side story that I'm a guy. It's always been a thing of mine to have characters, like what watch they wear says something. Like I like to stick my nose into the props wardrobe decisions about watches. And of course, we didn't have a lot of money, and I won't get into how this happened exactly, but I knew of the watch that Steve McQueen wore in the movie where he played a race car driver. So I managed to engineer it that we had that watch among 6 or 7 other watches. So when Nick showed up and I was with him and we were going through his wardrobe and it came to the watches and he said, what's the deal with this watch? And I said, well, that's the watch Steve McQueen wore. Like Tag Heuer designed it for him. He said, yes, let's go with that. So there was like this piece of Steve McQueen nostalgia. And the watch is important in the story because he trades it for a car, which was actually the very first scene we shot with Nick. It's just a little side story that always makes my job so much more fun, just a detail like that, which nobody knows about necessarily except maybe the actor and myself and 3 other people. And now everybody listening to this. Well, I don't know that I would say he was doing McQueen, but I think, Steve McQueen as an actor was very internal. He was a little bit on the stoic side. He wasn't prone to large gestures. And I think that, Nick's portrayal of Noah had all that going for it, although I'm sure Nick would 100% could have done that without channeling Steve McQueen. It started out as a 20-day shoot. We managed to get a 21st day out of it. I mean, there were several huge challenges to the film. One of them was technical, but and it goes back to the money, right? I mean, it was not a huge budget film. And once you take the everything above the line out, we only had about $2 million to actually make the film. And we were in this desert area, and the film was written for a world that was dried up, sunny, hot, endlessly hot. And in Osoyoos, there's a lot of sunshine there. And the locals said, geez, it maybe snows once, usually just after Christmas, and then that snow never sticks around for more than 24 hours. So we were going to be done before Christmas. We thought, okay, this is great. And then all through prep, it just poured rain every day. All the locals said, well, this never happens. And it seemed like it was never going to end. So we reconstructed this script to sort of say, well, the world is like stormy and wet, call it acid rain, whatever you want to call it. And then by the time we got shooting, it suddenly dropped to minus 16 and started snowing. And it was like that every day. And everybody said, this never happens. So we had to kind of embrace what was going on, say, hey, we couldn't afford this kind of art department. This is fantastic. And it had snowed in the Sahara Desert. So there was like this whole environmental climate, global warming thing going on all around us. And we were making a film that, was in part about that. So for me, that worked, but it created a lot of challenges just physically because we were outside in the cold a lot and all the wardrobe had already been chosen, to be a much warmer climate. So these characters were stuck in these little jackets and whatnot. So anyhow, what happened was I said at one point, this whole climax where we have Nick's character gets killed, there's no way we can do this in a day. Like there's just so many pieces. And what makes it even more difficult now is we have all this fresh snow that's fallen on that location. And so we're really going to have to go at this very carefully and kind of shoot the wide shots with the pristine snow, go in close for a bunch of stuff, go out back wide when we should now be seeing a lot of foot traffic, sort of tiptoe our way around the set like it was going to cause problems. So the producer said, well, that's really up to Nick. So I went to Nick's trailer and I got maybe 30 seconds into my pitch and he said, well, you want to do another day? And I said, yeah. And he said, well, let's do it. So that was just another story of how committed he was to the project. And, eventually we did get it done. Well, the other really big challenge was the technical part of all the driving sequences. And actually what we had decided to do was go with this technology where you have all of these screens all around the car, which are actually playing the environment going by. And in order to do that, we had to identify all those scenes, and I had to go pick all of those locations, like where is it they're going to be driving at this point in the story. And then the second unit went out to all of those locations and put like 8 cameras on the roof of the car and drove those roads so that we would have all of this footage that would fit and all of these angles that would fit any angle or window we might be looking out of. But when it came time to actually shoot that process stuff in the studio with the actors in the car, what happened was that the screens were the wrong ones. It didn't work. You could see all these pixels. It was this horror show. We had to flip everything out for green screen, which nobody wanted to do because that makes it immensely more difficult. So to me, that was like technically that was a big disappointment in the making of the film because of all of the time invested in getting us to that point to make it right. And then there was the VR thing, which was new to me. So there was VR being shot, and that required that the actors be available at certain times of the day in order to shoot their VR scenes, which was taking away from our shooting time, which in the winter, you only have so many hours of daylight, and just the cold, just getting people moving around in the cold. All those things really contributed to difficulties in making the film. But everybody was, I can say we all marshaled together. It was a great kind of team effort, and everybody, the cast, the crew, everybody was pulling to make it happen. It's just that you only have so many hours of daylight and, only so many ways you can deal with a problem in post-production when you also have a limited post-production budget. Well, the plan, even before I ever came on board, was that they were going to shoot 10 minutes worth of VR. Eventually the VR team showed up a few days before we started shooting. The whole thing was new to me, almost new to everybody. So it was always part of the plan. And I didn't really have anything much to do with it in that particular film. I think I helped try to figure out what sort of parts of scenes they might do. There was like a separate team working on that, and it was meant to be sort of for marketing and promotional purposes and get it out onto sites where people could tap into VR and maybe generate some excitement about the film, and to further work test the technology for other things. Also when we made this film, we were shooting in 2 formats. There was at that time there was something called Barco Escape, and we were shooting the film for that as well, which was a like triple screen. Ultimately you view it in a theater with three screens, one in the center and two that angle out from the side. I think there was maybe 4 films made with that technology, not meant to be the entire film, but parts of them. For me, I wasn't just making a film like I knew how to make a film. I had this VR element, and then we had this Barco escape, which meant that we completely had to frame things differently for that format, right? Like you'd have to get really wide on something. So there was a huge learning curve going on at the time. Well, I had managed to see a film this producer had made before that used some VR, and I had obviously talked to the guys that were involved in it, and the Barco Escape and the DP Mark Debrescu had worked on one film using that Barco Escape technology. And so we really spent a lot of time in prep deciding what scenes for sure we were going to use that technology. We didn't really storyboard it out or anything, but we picked the scenes so that those were scheduled into the days. Like the first AD knew, okay, today this number of scenes are also going to be shot in Barco Escape, so we got to build in time for that. The VR was worked out with that VR team, so then they would make requests for certain scenes, because how that would get shot is we would shoot a scene, say, inside of the house that Sarah and Jacob lived in, that Nick shows up at. So we'd shoot that scene for our regular format and our Barco Escape if we were going to do it. And then basically there'd be an abbreviated version of that scene in which we would have to pull out every light, every single person, leave the actors in there with the VR camera person, and they would just act the scene out as if they were on a stage. We didn't really have a chance, to review it and say, oh, we should change this performance or try this differently. The team got a couple cracks at it, and then off they would go. And we never really saw until later, how it was going to go together, because you can't really tell until they managed to put it into some sort of viewing format where you can kind of see the 360 degrees. For somebody like me, it was sort of cool to be involved in some new technology going on. I subsequently got involved in both those formats again on another film, in which I would say I was much more eager to be more involved. At the time, it was often felt like this royal pain in the ass, like somebody takes your main actor away and says, we only need 20 minutes. And of course, 45 minutes goes by, and, you're having an anxiety attack because, towards the end of the day, somebody's going to come along and say, like, are you guys going to go into overtime? So there's always this pressure that the clock's always ticking, right? Now you have this whole other element. It would be like if your EPK unit just kept pulling people out of your set all throughout the day and dragging them off to do interviews when they should be shooting scenes. No director would put up with that, right? But in this case, of course, it was all part of the grand plan to market the film and help people make their money back and so on and so forth. So you can't argue with that, So it was it was an interesting challenge dealing with just my own patience level and trying to understand the technology, get a grasp on it, figure out how it could work better maybe next time. The actors, it was all new to them. At first they were kind of like, oh man, like we got to do this extra stuff. But then they kind of dug it, because it was like something new. And then they realized, hey, we're on a set and there's nobody here but this one guy with these 8 tiny or 12 tiny little cameras on a stick, and we can just go nuts. So they kind of, got a kick out of that. We talked briefly about it when I first met him in Vegas, just, because he was vaguely aware that there was these 2 other things being done, Barco Escape and VR. And he was sort of curious what they were and how much they were going to impinge on our day. When he got there, then of course there was this technical team, and so I joined in, but they largely explained how it worked and, I think showed him an example from something else. But I would say, he was fine. He embraced it. He was all gung-ho. The guy's always so prepared. So it was like, just, okay, we're doing another take, only we're doing it in a different way, different technology. And he was so prepared. And we had our act together in terms of the shooting day that, I'm not the kind of director that loves to do a lot of takes. So we might do 2 or 3 takes. And I was ready to move on. So adding, a fourth, which was in VR, wasn't that much of an imposition for him, because I'm sure he's been on films where certain directors want to do like 27 takes or something, right? Which is probably possibly more frustrating than doing a fourth one in a new format.
The Humanity Bureau was politically of the era, but it was also trying to tap into new filmmaking technologies. According to Variety, we shot the film in 3 different formats, including standard theatrical, 3-screen Barco Escape theatrical, and cinematic virtual reality to provide multiple avenues for the audience to engage with and experience the story's universe, said producer Kevin DeWalt. We hope to give viewers more options for alternative content within today's new media. For the film's VR release, it was sold in the following way. The Humanity Bureau VR Movie app is a custom-themed multi-format movie experience app. You'll be invited to the VR episodic premiere of Humanity Bureau VR, featuring Academy Award winner Nicolas Cage. You'll be teleported and immersed into the exclusive The Humanity Bureau VR Movie Lounge to enjoy an exclusive selection of content. The Humanity Bureau VR cinematic experience in 7 episodes, bonus material from behind the scenes and making of, the feature film movie trailers, standard 2D, Barco Escape formats, and on Earth Day 2018, you will get the full-length feature film in standard 2D and the unique and very special Barco Escape that will revolutionize the future of cinema. The Humanity Bureau V-Revolution is based on the feature film and produced by Josh Courtney, Travis Cloyd, and Rob Bryanton. This experience takes users through the alternative storylines that coexist with the feature film, but they can be viewed as standalone episodes. The series is written by Dave Schultz, Travis Cloyd, and directed by Rob W. King and Josh Courtney. VR is, of course, commonplace, but Barco Escape was a cinematic experience that had an eventful, yet brief run in front of moviegoers. The journey may have been short, but the technology was used in The Maze Runner and Star Trek Beyond. Barco's website announced that The Hollywood Reporter called Barco the future of film, but that's a bit misleading. Barco was mentioned in an article about where cinemas were headed in the future to attract viewers, but in no way does it say that Barco is the chosen one. Rather, it was just noting that it was some of the future technology available. Immersive? Maybe. But looking at the projections, the screens are not connected, so between each screen there is a black line, and the screens form a triangle without a peak. By 2018, the company had closed its doors. The website now reads, "Thank you for visiting Barco Escape." On February 8, 2018, Barco announced the closure of the Barco Escape business. We are thankful to our customers, supporters in the industry, and audiences around the world for joining us over the last 4 years. If you would still like to learn about Barco Escape, the website is still available for archival purposes. Click here. Nicolas Cage films used to be draws based on his name alone. But now Cage and the movies are trying to reinvent themselves to survive in a content-rich world.
It's going to take a new set of skills, though, for film performers, having had the experience now. I'm a film performer that, I'm engaged with my co-star, but I've also developed a relationship with the camera. I like the traditional format. I flirt with the camera. I believe everybody in the audience has their own individual relationship with their, lack of a better word, star, and they have that secret with that star, and they connect with that, and that's between them and the person they're watching. When you work in VR with 360, it looks like a UFO, and there's cameras on every side of it. And I know this camera, even like when I'm doing a traditional film and the camera's on my co-star, I don't really start to relax until the camera's on me. But in VR, you've got a camera here, you got a camera over there, and all over here, and I'm trying to flirt. I'm trying to flirt with that camera too, and I can't get to that camera because I'm into this camera, and it's like really distracting. So it's something you have to, I think I'm going to have to develop some new muscles and a new set of skills to be able to flirt with all those cameras.
I would do another film with Nick Cage any day too. He was just an immensely wonderful guy to work with, and really sort of got on the bus with all of us, and many days helped lead the bus because there he was standing out in the cold, ready to go. Well, that was kind of a funny story because I didn't really know Nick well enough. I'd never worked with him before, so I didn't know if he was that kind of actor where, he'd say, just like hit me, right? Because there are actors like that. Just slap me, like actually slap me harder, so I can get this reaction. So we were blocking it out, and I was talking to him and Sarah about it, and there was, the stunt coordinator was there, and I was sort of beating around the bush about, whether it was a real slap or not. Nick said, no, watch this. Go ahead, Sarah. You swing at me. And she did, and he moved his head, and she never touched him. And, he's like, that's the way I'd like to do it. And I said, well, great, because that's the only way I've ever done it. Like, I've never actually had anybody really hit anybody, right? And he sold it like 100%. Yeah, it was great. There was some pressure for a while after Nick came on board. When I first talked to Nick, he was like, it's great that because I brought it up. He's like, no, man, it's great that I die, right? And we did talk about him getting shot in the head because, um, it came up right away just in terms of safety concerns. But, having sorted through that, it's also kind of a creative decision, right? But it just would be the most violent, impactful, surprising moment if it was done that way. And he was into it 100%. But once he actually was on board, some of the money came around and said, Nick Cage can't die. You're going to have to change this, right? And we're like, why? It would be this like massive surprise. It'll be very tragic. And the kid has to go on alone. That's Dave Schultz's thing. So that's what's going to happen, right? And besides, and they sort of said, well, what if we make a sequel or something? And I'm like, well, I doubt that will happen. And if it did, it should be that kid maybe like 7 or 8 years later. He's now in his 20s, and the world's, still worse off. And he's our new hero, played by somebody we don't know yet that's going to be a star down the road. And anyhow, the point of it all is if Nick doesn't die, he's not going to do the film. So you're kind of like, oh, okay. I talked to him about it, that there was this pressure, and he was like, no way. And do you want me to do anything about it? Like, do I need to call somebody? Or I said, no, we're just going to tell him that you're not going to do it. And he was like, hey, well, I won't. So